Yes, sometimes we say one,
Okay,
two,
yeah,
three,
good.
4, 5, 6, 7 days ago, or who knows how long it's been that book chart has been on your screen. But you know, there are times when we wait and we're waiting for something with weight. We're waiting for somebody who will light up the screen and increase our knowledge about different things. So, who am I talking about today? Who am I talking with today? I'm talking to Remi Raji, which is a pen name of Aderemi Raji Oyelade. He's a professor of English and Africana Studies at the University of Ibadan, the premier university in Nigeria. We say University of Ibadan and all others. He has been visiting professor and writer of a number of, and a writer to a number of institutions, including a visiting professor and writer to a number of institutions, including Southern Illinois University at Edwardsville, Universities of California at Riverside and Irvine, University of Cape Town, South Africa, Cambridge University in the UK, and Humboldt University in Berlin in Germany. He is a man of many parts. Apart from academics, he's also into administration. And he's also been in the vanguard of PEN Nigeria. He was there from 2001 to 2010. Later, he became president of the Association of Nigerian Authors. And I'm sure you all know he's the golden era of ANA, which was 2011 to 2015. Professor Remi Raji is the creator of a Nigerian panel of Global Community of Poets, the lyricline.org, which introduces the best of Nigerian poetry to the world. What else do you want me to say about this man who has served as head of Department of English at Ibadan from 2009 to 2012? He was Dean of Faculty of Arts 2012 and to 2015, and he was the first substantive and foundation Dean of Humanities, Management, and Social Sciences at Augustine University in Lara Ekpe. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the one and only Remi Raji, who actually is Aderemi Raji Oyelade. Prof, you're welcome to Book Chat.
Thank you so much, Kole. Long time.
Yes,
Thank you
it's
for.
been quite a while. It's been quite a
Yeah,
while. And now we're lucky that what is bringing us together again is that book which you have called Playful Blasphemies, post-proverbial as archetypes of modernity in Yoruba culture. To those who don't understand Yoruba, we would have to explain it that this is your own teasing of Owelaluwo. No, but I think I'm going to leave you to that to let us know why you chose this. And the title is very heavy to my mind. Maybe it's just me, but maybe you want to dig a little bit into the title and the reason why you decided to do this book.
okay. Thank you very much, Kole. This book came to being well over 17 years after I'd published the first essay of nearly almost the same title in Research in African Literatures in 1999. But the foray into studying this phenomenon of radical proverbs, newly created proverbs that belong to the new imaginations of modernist or postmodernist speakers of this language, um, started in 1993 or thereabout. But I gave the first seminar as a COB lecturer in the Department of English under the tutelage of Emeritus Professor D.S. Izebaye and Professor Niyo Shundari in 1995 in the Department of English. And the idea of blasphemy and playful, the sound almost, well, should we say contradictory or oxymoronic, It's an attempt to show the multi-dimensional functions of these range of new proverbs, or shall I say radical proverbs. Before 1993, there was no word, or I thought that there was no word like post-proverbials. What we have has always been proverbs. And the creation or the fabrication of the term post-proverbials came almost like at an epiphanic moment. After having studied works of scholars like Jacques Derrida, post-structuralism, talk of post-colonialism. Remember our friend Ogaga Ifowodo used to joke at the time that everything is post. There's always post of everything. The only post that he knows is post office. And we used to joke about that. So I began to think about the aftermath creations or proverbs that are like afterthoughts of original proverbs. Or like, shall we say that they're like the first arms, they are the prosthetics of the original proverbs, original thoughts of the typical speaker of the language. I started with a familiar space, that is my Yoruba tongue. And I remember that in primary school and secondary school, we used to be served half or a quarter of the proverb item, and we are requested to complete it. As some of us who grew on the lap of our grandmothers, we knew these proverbs, but because we are playful, we want to see how possibly we can just end these proverbs in a very playful manner. There are those who do not know, who didn't know at that time. And it occurred to me after the end of my doctoral presentation, I wanted to do something new. I wanted to go out of the code, shall we say, the code complicity of the text of the mainstream literature, go into pop culture, into something that is of the street, something that is translational and that is really functional, that people can relate with beyond the corners of the university. I wanted to marry the town and the gown. And it occurred to me that this thing that we used to play with actually continues to function. On media, on radio, you find radio disc jockeys, radio presenters creating their own proverb speech acts as speech acts. And then, of course, you know that Oladejo Okedeji's Rere has that character, Lawuwo, who at a certain point of psychotic madness decided to marry 2-3 proverbs on together, and they still have a certain meaning, but they tell so much about the psychotic mind of. But now we are not talking about the psychosis. We are talking about the dynamism of language and the possibility of changing, almost going against the grain of Ruth Finnegan's idea that proverbs, especially African proverbs, have fixity. They are fixed. They are almost like fossilized. You cannot change them. That was what we were fed with in our second year at the University of Ibadan. That you read a particular chapter on proverbs by Ruth Finnegan, and it says there is a formula, it's a formulaic pattern. Yes, in my research, I found out that yes, there are formulaic patterns for the creation of proverbs, but there is a way in which new formulas exist, emerge because of the dynamism of the language. Proverbs are not fossilized. Proverbs are subject to change, especially in a dynamic society as ours. And that was how I came up with it. So it is both playful, especially to the youthful, to the young generation, and blasphemous to the older generation, as my fieldwork proved, that it could be playful, it could be blasphemous. So what I did was just to yoke the two epitaph, or maybe something, an adjectival way of describing post-proverbials, that they are both playful and they are blasphemous. And that is what I've worked on before arriving at the publication of this book.
Well, what our listeners and viewers might not also know is that you did not only stay within the Yoruba cultural matrix, that your fame about this post-proverbial has gone as far as to Croatia. And I know that one or two scholars in Croatia also started to collect post-proverbials. Would you want to talk about how you inspired the work in Croatia and maybe beyond? I know about the one in Croatia, but I'm sure there are
Okay.
probably some others.
Okay, there's something about Croatia, East and Central Europe, and the study of folk literature. Um, my first foray beyond my time in Germany, the real scholarship that led to the publication of the book was in Germany. But my first foray after Germany was in a place called Tavira in Portugal. That was where there was the first international colloquium of proverb scholars. And that was where I had the opportunity of first presenting a keynote paper, um, invitation from Professor Wolfgang Mieder of University of Vermont. So, and he was there. So I was privileged to meet with Wolfgang Mieder, who probably took me in and encouraged me to do further work. It was in this city also, Tavira in Portugal, that I now met set of other scholars from Hungary, from Croatia, from Poland, and a number of other European countries. So it wasn't that I inspired the work in Croatia. I actually collaborated with those scholars because later I had visiting or residency in Croatia, in Hungary, and looking forward to another visit in Poland. So it's more like a community of scholars who are working in the same field. If I refer to transgressive paremiology, that is radical proverb making, as post-proverbials, in Europe, and of course much of America, the terminology that is used is anti-proverb. And so when the Croatian scholars use it, they prefer to use anti-proverb, which actually came even before post-proverbials.
I see. Well, I mean, you talked about field work, which means that you have a methodological framework and that you employed. How did you distinguish between the traditional Yoruba proverbs and post-proverbials? And how did you navigate their fluid boundaries and oral discourse?
Okay, well, to distinguish traditional from radical is on the face of it easy. It is only when we begin to categorize the radical ones that it becomes much more delicate. Now, first of all, there's a proverb database. Even if you don't have a database of proverbs, maybe say in Yoruba scholarship, but there have been a wealth of publications. People have worked. Professor Oyekon Owo Moyela of blessed memory has published about 5,200 proverbs in his magnum opus, published just about a year before he died. That was in 2005. And so there is always that database in print form that we can always go back to. Even going back to 1848, 1876 in the works of Samuel Ajayi Crowther, who collected the first set of Yoruba proverbs, and works of A.B. Ellis and Bascom and the rest of them who have collected up to Isaac Delano, 1947, Yoruba proverbs. All of these works are already there in print to be assessed. Okay, now these contain the body of traditional proverbs. For instance, the meta proverbs, Oro, is already there. So, and that formula is there. The the lexis or the lemma, what they call the lemmas, those metaphors, each one of those keywords are already there, formed, almost like fixed. Now it is when another person comes up and plays on that particular meta proverb that we begin to recognize this is different. There's a certain mark of difference that you see or that you note in new that are created as against those that are already recorded, those that are already popular, that are current in the imagination and in the usage of the proverbs within given society. I always, I'm going back to the example, the Yoruba example, but I can also give some other examples in other African languages. But as I said, it's better to start from where everything started. So it is easy to distinguish between traditional proverbs or conventional proverbs and what we call non-conventional radical proverbs, or what we can call post-proverbials. But when it comes to distinguishing types of post-proverbials, the various formulations, the various compositions, according to their structure, not according to meaning, but much more to according to the structure of presentation. That is where we begin to theorize further types of proverbials.
Well, they say tenny, takisa and taston. Because I am so tied to Professor Akiyemi, and I know that he's talked about that a proverb usually comes in two parts, and because these days when I watch Kunle Afford, he has this thing, give me 10 proverbs. And then we have Masoyibo, who also and some of these things appear not to fit into the formula. They appear not to fit into what we think a proverb should be. There are some of them that are so lengthy that they are almost mini stories on their own. So how do you see this against the background of this new trend of the popularization of proverbs on social media, and then the fact that Professor Akemi talks about proverbs having two parts, or maybe
Okay,
more?
let's start from proverbs having two parts. That is the basic understanding of the structure of proverbs, and that's why when we're young, we'll give and then complete. So this is a classical example of the structure of the traditional proverb. There are proverbs that have three parts. There are proverbs that have four parts. In fact, a critic, a scholar, G.B. Milner, has called the quadripartite form of the conventional proverb. And it was using a particular different language, I think Russian or so, but it's referred to as quadripartite. But you can find quadripartite also form in, say, an African language proverb like Yoruba proverb. So, as I said, it is true that a proverb has two basic parts. Shall we say main clause, subordinate clause? But that is the basic and classical formation, structure of the traditional proverb. But there are three parts, four parts, and even five parts of the proverb, so that the proverb does not yield to what we call the brevity of the language again. The proverb becomes almost like a guttural, like it becomes much more extensive, becomes a story, becomes narration, as you said, like the example of Afford and some of those who now trope upon this proverb. When you check closely, you see that they invent their own. They put their own additment to the original proverb. And so what is actually happening is that there is a constant spirit exhibition of the post-proverbial imagination in contemporary times. Most of the things that happen now, they're based upon, the post-proverbial expression or the post-proverbial imagination of, the typical expression of these these new formations of telling stories out of a given proverb. Sometimes people yoke lines from Oduifa sometimes. They take one Oduifa and link it to another one. And it sounds so sweet, aesthetically satisfying, meaningful. But if you put them on paper and you check, you see that what they have done is that they have grafted one form with another. It is still a post-proverbial activity. So the post-proverbial activity is very, very fluid in these times. Very, very fluid in these times. So there is Wellerism, there are proverbs, there are axioms, there are ordinary popular sayings, there are chants from maybe a sa, there are oriki, and then somebody picks an oriki and weaves another proverb into it, and then it sounds almost different or perhaps original to the creator of that saying, but it is the activity of post-proverbial that is ongoing. At the time all of these were happening, there was it was an activity that had no name when we were in primary and secondary school. What is happening now on social media has happened first in the 1973 book, Rererun, by Oladejo Okediji. And so what people do is that they weave and twist clauses, phrases of some proverbial saying with another one, or they take a riddle, they link it with something that seems like a like a ballad form story. They create all of these things, and then when they produce it, and that has been the this is from the ingenuity of our script writers. You find there is no one Yoruba film now that you will not find an attempt to exhibit the post-proverbial activity.
Yes.
If
I know
check,
that
if
the man from Crescent University picks these proverbs from films and he would explain what they mean. I agree with you.
yes. So if you listen to many of the tracks of Nice, but if you find well, I try to show in the presentation that everything about Nice's songs is tied to at least one proverb. There's always one proverb that seems like a line upon which his lyrics are woven. But sometimes you find that he retains the proverb. Sometimes he tropes, he plays upon the proverb, and the proverb becomes a post-proverbial.
Well, I think King Sunny Ade also, you have a little bit of that in King Sunny Ade's works as well, because some of the proverbs I think I know, I got them from King Sunny Ade, and but that brings me to Professor Toyin Falola's stand on the authorship of proverbs, and maybe post-proverbials have authorship. Is this a problem for the African mind, where we're not too hung on knowing the author of anything? It seems to be very collective. What's your take on Professor Falola's position on the authorship of proverbs? I don't know whether he would say the same thing of post-proverbials.
Now, most proverbs we know they are the creations of the communal spirit observances of people over time, so that even perhaps the first anonymous creator or user of that proverb is forgotten. So there are no references. The reference to most traditional proverbs is the essence of its anonymity. It is, and so if we start from that point, the exact opposite could be for post-proverbials. There are post-proverbials that are created optimally by the general spirit that informs the creation of traditional proverbs. That almost at the same time, people have a way of troping on, bluffing on a particular proverb, and you probably at a certain use of it, you do not know the creator of that post-proverbial. For instance, they will say, màálù tí kò nírù, Ọlọ́run ní baálé ṣinṣin. That is, for the cow that has no tails, it is God that serves as his repellent or something like that, right?
Yes.
But when you say màálù tí kò nírù, what usually ends it for a post-proverbial creator? Màálù tí kò nírù, ó wà ní Sábó. Màálù tí kò nírù, ó wà ní Kárà. Màálù tí kò nírù, ó wà ní Ṣàngó. Depending on the location of the speaker of that, the user of that post-proverbial, we cannot, as much as we try, we cannot locate or find the original user or the first creator of this post-proverbial. And so it's many other post-proverbials. So what stays for the anonymity of the traditional proverb also qualifies relatively for post-proverbials. But in my book, I think in chapter 3 or 4, there is what I refer to as eponymous post-proverbials. Now, eponymous post-proverbials are post-proverbials that are already known to have been created by particular characters, persona within society. And that is why we describe this post-proverbial by the name of the creators. For instance, we can have Owe Lawuwo. Lawuwo is a fictional character in Rererun. So it's perhaps the first, back in time, whether in fictional time or non-fictional time, that is perhaps the first recorded post-proverbial range in Yoruba scholarship. But beyond that, in real life activity for politicians, for comedians, you find Owe Babasuwe, the proverbs that are created, that are almost patented, by Babasuwe. There is Owe MKO, there is Owe MKO Abiola. I'm sure you know those proverbs of 1992, 93, 94, when Abiola was contesting for the, for the presidency of the Nigerian nation. There is Owe Benga Funwotan. There is Owe Funwotan. And so we have Gadeboye. So we have post-proverbials that are eponymous, that are named after their creators. So it is not all post-proverbials that are as anonymously created as traditional proverbs. That's the much I can say about that.
Okay, well, I just want to take you back a little bit just to tease out the differences, because when we get into the universe of meaning, when you look at a proverb like Maalu Tio Niru Oluwalomba Leshishin, it is saying to something more metaphysical than physical, that there is always a metaphysical intervention in the affairs and the problems of humans. But when it now goes post-proverbial, it says Maalu Tio Niru, it's found at a location. Does it not flatten meaning? Does it not take a stab at what the original intention was? What would you say to that?
Okay, thank you very much. That is part of the what we shall note as the characteristics in terms of meaning or value of the post-proverbial text. Now, the post-proverbial utterance seems to be a creation that is urgent and that is in need of an urgent response and has urgent meaning and is direct as direct is possible. Where the traditional conventional proverb is essentially metaphysical, metaphorical, and philosophical. The essentiality of the post-proverbial is the direct opposite of the value and meaning traditional proverb. So once we know that, while one is direct, the other one is indirect. While one attempts to tease out meaning and is tries to set a certain moral compass, the other one attempts to be as volatile, as iconoclastic as it is, as blunt as it could be. So that once we know that, especially, I mean, and that tells us about the imagination and the consciousness, the difference in consciousness and attitude perspectives between older generation, whether older generation, in terms of what they wear, in terms of what they eat, compared to the younger generation, the users of the language. And so, and you see, even in the lifestyle, the older generation would rather choose to take something much more organic. So we can actually say that maybe these proverbs are even much more organic. They relate much more to nature. They are very, romantic in the way they tease out meaning. Unlike the newer generation, who are combative, who are direct, and who are breakers of images. And so that's a major difference.
Wow. Well, you know what? The only way I know how to express this is I would have loved to extend this for as long as we can take, and also can attest to the concentration of our viewers. But there are people who will probably take me to Ilealatori, where the discipline young boys who are naughty. And I don't want to be naughty. That's why I'm going to bring this last question. And you've mentioned it. In what ways do you see post-proverbials functioning as a form of cultural resistance or subversion in the face of modernization and globalization?
Okay. First of all, we talk about resistance.
Yes.
Resistance comes from a certain awareness of a certain oppressive character or an oppressive condition. So you resist it. In the same way that we say, oh, it is a playful thing to create new proverbs, it is also an unfortunate emergence of an imagination that is almost anti-cultural, in which people do not actually know the original. Because at a point, my scholarship has been criticized as almost lionizing that which is anti-cultural, which is anti-knowledge and all of that. The idea is to see the way we are going in the development of our language and to show the different various kinds of competencies that we've had. I talk about a certain dual multi-competence for those who understand the basic structure, knowledge, and the meaning, metaphorical meaning, and the completion of the traditional proverb. And those and the other ones who are at the extreme end, who have new competence, a competence of a certain new knowledge, which is both combative and restrictive and reactionary against the traditional proverb. In a way, the inability to understand the traditional proverb tells us so much about the need for us to teach the traditional proverb, and also for us to go beyond and understand the various ways that by these traditional proverbs become examples of new modernities. There are proverbs that do not have, now there are so many of our proverbs that are even not post-proverbials. Way back in time, what I call colonial proverbs, that have elements, items that are of Western epistemology, Western civilization. Haruna Isola will say, ẹni tí mọ́tò bá gbá kọ́ni yóò mú nọ́mbà mọ́tò. Ẹni tí takisi mú nọ́mbà mọ́tò. That is not a post-proverbial. It's a modern proverb. But there are post-modernist, post-proverbial inflections of these traditional proverbs. The idea is to encourage our understanding of the various scholarships that exist in the study of proverbs so that we can fly as birds with two wings. Mm-hmm. If you know so much about the traditional proverb, you lack the knowledge of the new imagination by which you will be able to understand the youthful generation. And for the youthful generation, if they only know the conventional, radical, combative proverbs, they are also lacking in understanding the basic knowledge, the basic origin, where their new creation takes energy from. So I am advocating for an understanding of those various possibilities and developments in not in traditional scholarship only, but also in radical scholarship of the African proverb.
Wow. Wow. I really, this is one of those times in which I wish I could tie down time. You know, Roger Somole, we cannot tie time. And I have to. I wish I could go and buy more like it is. But, you know, it's been a pleasure talking with Professor Remi Raji Oyelade. You know, he is a professor of English and African Studies, and he's taking us through the whole gamut of a book itself. And I would urge all our viewers, please grab a copy of this book. Let's talk about it. Let's bring it alive. And let's make this one of those second wings. He says, the bird does not fly with one wing. It flies with two. Same for the aeroplane. It needs the two wings to fly. I don't know what the new inventions will be. I don't know whether the drones don't need two wings, but I think in terms of scholarship, we need 2 weeks. On that note, and on behalf of all those who will listen to this, I say to you, thank you very much for taking the time to come. And we will be with you when the next book is ready that you want to discuss with us. Thank you very much, Professor Raji Oyelade.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.